Today's conversation is about who we are and how we live together. Zambia is often described as a country of many peoples, languages, and histories, and that diversity is one of our strengths. But it also places a responsibility on how we speak about one another, especially in moments of political competition. This episode is not about political parties, policies, or personalities. It's about identity, belonging, and the idea behind the phrase many of us grew up hearing: one Zambia, one nation. My guest today is Moono Chungu, a writer, communications and public relations specialist, and former, should I say former journalist or should I just say journalist? You correct me. In her work, including her book Roots and her writing during the last election cycle, she has reflected deeply on Zambia's diversity and has urged readers to refrain from using ethnic rhetoric to win support. In this conversation, we sit with what it means to belong in a plural country, why identity should never be treated as a campaign strategy, and what kind of democratic culture is needed to hold a nation together beyond our differences. Mono, thank you for joining me. I think it couldn't have come at a better time, especially now as we head into our national elections in the this year. Actually, I was going to say in the coming year. It's 2026. A happy new year to our viewers as well. If you're new here, my name is Zainab Taonga Chirwa, and I am your host. So, Mono, I did say, I don't know if I heard there when in my introduction, when I referred to you as a former journalist. So I don't know if that's what you are, or you've transitioned, or you're still there. It's something that just remains once a journalist, always a journalist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm still a journalist, and it's just that I don't work in traditional journalism, but I
Yes.
do freelance and things like that.
Hmm.
Once a journalist, always a journalist, indeed.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's an incredibly important one, right? Especially as someone who, you really have, you're an amazing writer. And something I must commend is how you've chosen to use your voice, not just in terms of just write. You've written, you're a published author, an award-winning published author. You have also used it as part of your civic duty in terms of the work that you do in terms of whether it's your journalism, public relations. And in a country like Zambia, where we traditionally had a very strong culture of reading the newspaper or listening to the news, 19 hours, it's time to keep quiet. It's time to watch the news. That has obviously changed. It's still there, but people now get their news from online, from Facebook, from Twitter. And these are spaces that have become public civic spaces as well, where we talk to one another as citizens, right? And where even our public representatives speak to us as well in terms of this continued dialogue. And I guess that's what I wanted to speak about. Who is Mono, that Zambian girl?
Well, I am, like you've described, I am a journalist, I'm an author, and I currently work in marketing and communications, but I do public relations work as well.
Hmm.
That Zambian girl is a bi-tribal girl. I'm Bemba by tribe, but my mom is Tonga.
Hmm.
So I am Tonga and Bemba, and I've grown up in both of those cultures, among other cultures, because there's a lot of tribal mixing in my family. So I have a grandmother who's Lozi, and I have family from the East as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's essentially what I am. I am very passionate about Zambia, and I dedicated my degree to Zambia, and I've been using it to build Zambia in my own industry. And yeah, that's essentially who I am.
I think that's a great place to begin, and you highlight something that is a very Zambian experience, right? You are highlighting your very diverse family background. Being born into a quote unquote mixed heritage family, and it's not even necessarily something that we even think too deeply about in general as Zambians. When you grow up as a child in that kind of home, it's a very normal thing. I think for most of us. I can certainly relate as well. While both my parents are from the east, in terms of my immediate family, my parents, siblings, they have gotten married in the north, in the south as well. I have whom traditionally we would refer to them as my brothers and my sisters, not my cousins, in terms of the quote unquote first cousins. They themselves have also gone on to find partners in the northwest, etc. So it's a very normal, very Zambian thing that we've never had to. I'd like to think in general in terms of how we associate and socialize is we've just generally mixed as a country. However, what would you say then creates these tensions now where we have to sit and have a conversation like this one right now, where we have to actually start talking about the duty of being careful not to breed ethnic tensions within a country like ours? What leads to that?
Well, I think it started way back, maybe before independence itself,
Mm.
because Zambia has 73 tribes.
Yes.
And back in those days, people never used to mix a lot. You
Mm.
were born in your place of origin and you lived there.
Mm.
And if you ever interacted with someone from a different tribe, then you would sort of, I think a lot of people sort of then created stereotypes about how a whole group of people, like, oh, all Tonga people are like this, all
Mm.
Bemba people are like
Mhm.
so that has stuck over the years, and I think some people would then pass it on to their children and their
Mm.
grandchildren. It was just a constant tension between tribes.
Mm.
There are a few tribes like tribal cousins,
Mm.
like the Lozis are
Mhm.
tribal cousins, and the
Mm.
Vales, and then from this other side of Zambia, there's the Northerners and the Easterners who
Mm.
also do what we call Chimboya.
Chimboya. Mm.
So those tribal cousins have then found a way to live with each other and embrace each other, joke with each other, and just make things lighthearted. But I think across the vastness of the country, there still is a little bit of tribal tension.
Mm. Mm.
I do know that Kenneth Kaunda,
Mm.
as our first president, was intentional about tribal mixing.
Yes.
So after independence was gained, people were encouraged to mix.
Yes.
So people were sent into different places to work,
Mm-hmm.
and that then increased the tribal mixing and increased the people's interactions with each other. And I think to an extent, maybe the goal was really to just encourage people to see each other as one Zambia, one nation.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes over time, and even probably during that same time, there still is this you and a we,
Yes.
so this
Yes.
division
Yes.
between so I think the only way to resolve it really is to speak about it, and that's
Mm.
one of the reasons why I've even put myself as a subject
Mm.
to it because my name alone
Mm.
is a depiction of a tribally mixed person.
Yes,
So yeah.
yes, 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 yes. I really appreciate the history that you provided us with, right? Taking it back all the way to independence and the very intentional national cohesion project that our founding president, the late Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, embarked on in terms of his governance strategy of ensuring that Zambians got to know one another and travel across the country, and specifically in terms of where the Zambian government for a long time was the biggest, I think remains the biggest employer within Zambia, above the public sector, in terms of formal employment. Sorry, that practice of where you apply for a post for instance if you're a teacher and you have qualified and you apply for a public post teaching post, the government can then post you wherever in the country and you are meant to travel there and then set yourself up there. And I think that is something
Mhm.
that began since then and has continued till now. And this you see this in terms of in the healthcare services, etc. If you're going to be a public, you're going to work in the public service, and I think even in terms of just in terms of bureaucracy and administration within government departments as well, where there was a very intentional decision appointment of personalities where people were appointed not just according to who was in power and appointing people from their own tribe, from his own tribe, but people from different backgrounds. And I think that appreciation, as a Pan African himself, he knew that this was very much a a very common and natural tension that would exist in this new post colonization Zambia, because this is something that had been a problem in other parts of the continent as well in terms of even the world as well. And I know you make reference to ethnic tensions, for instance, that happened in Rwanda or even with our neighbors in Zimbabwe, where if there is no concerted effort by those in power and in government, those who are I mean, it's not just their responsibility, but especially those who are in power, that they don't just designate leadership and to only be to only mean that it can only be in the hands of certain groups, then that would be very dangerous for the national project. And I think that's a very important point that you make, right? I guess specifically, especially as a country, we are a republic and we're a democratic republic specifically. So we especially after the multi-party independence. where multipartyism was introduced and democracy was involved. People are allowed to vote. Political different political parties are allowed to exist and to register. And even there, again, I think we can pride ourselves as Zambians. We've had very successful transition and handing over of power over the years, right? I think we've had about six different administrations, different presidents, and that has happened peacefully without any violence, political violence. And I think that's something to honor, to acknowledge, but to also to strongly protect, right? Especially now over where you're seeing this resurgence, I think being brought to the forefront in the political arena. It's one thing for it to exist within our social, within the social space where when we engage one another, which you definitely also do mention that it has definitely existed, but there has been sort of like a buffer, right? Especially with the newer generation where people were actually being systematically forced to live and find themselves across across the country and get to know other people, right? So while this is not something that was going to happen overnight, but I think we cannot regress from that. So in what way do you think then, you say that it is important for us to talk about this, for us to be able to tackle it head on. What would who would you then say bears the responsibility or responsibilities to do that talking, and in what manner, or in what on what platform?
I think it definitely starts from up. It starts
Mm,
with the our leaders
mm,
and our opposition leaders as well.
mhm,
And I do think that a lot of tribalism starts even from there. So
mhm.
they need
Yes.
to then change.
Mhm,
You know, I've seen over the years with the election period. That's when you hear a lot of talk about if you vote for these people and if you vote for those people from that other tribe. And then there's also the aspect of even like political silencing, people then creating stereotypes. I've heard the worst of the worst. I'll just
mhm.
give an example.
Yes.
During the 2016 election, there was talk about if you vote for our current president, who
Mm.
is Tonga,
Yes.
then all of Lusaka will be filled with cows. I think that even
Mhm.
in the last election in 2021,
Sure.
you know? So it starts there. Instead of
Mm,
telling people that you mustn't vote for someone because they belong to this tribe, or you alone as a person deciding that you're going to vote for someone who is either of your tribe or your tribe or cousin, you
mhm,
need to be more open minded
mhm,
about it as a holistic thing. Someone
mhm,
who will be leading our country.
mhm,
How is this? What policy person going to include in our country and things
mhm,
like that. So I think the people, it starts from the top and it needs to go down. So during elections, I say in my book that during election period is when all the tribalist comments come out to play.
mhm,
That needs to be stopped.
mhm,
And I'm actually us as a country, because in the last election, even though there was a little bit of political tension and tribal tension around, I think even as a young people, we really put our feet down and said,
yes.
no, this time around, we're going to look at things based off of where someone comes from.
Mhm,
And you see it even in the voting patterns, you know, you
mhm.
see that in South, in fact, during the 2016 election again, there was a constituency, Dundumwezi, that was condemned for having, I think it was 3 votes
Yes.
for the then president, Edgar Lungu, who is from the eastern side of
Mhm,
Zambia.
mhm,
But all of this was going on. No one was speaking about the fact that in Chama, there was 0 votes
mhm.
for our now current president,
President.
Hakainde Hichilema,
Mhm,
who's
mhm,
from the country.
mhm,
So those things, like people want to focus on the little things, but really and truly, I mean, if we'll speak about it, that's fine. But
mhm,
instead of coming to sort of condemn people, let's like try to restructure the way people think.
mhm,
That you mustn't vote for because they're familiar. You
mhm.
must vote for them because at the end of the day, you care about the good of the whole nation.
Yes. Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm, mhm. I think you raise a very good point here about basically the quality of debate within the political arena and voter education. I think it speaks to that's what you're speaking to the heart of it. Is that what culture are we cultivating as Zambians when we say when Zambians go to the polls, when politicians are traveling around canvassing, campaigning, what are the reasons that they're giving Zambians to vote for them? You know, and
Mhm.
what kind of Zambia are you? Are they claiming to represent and hoping to lead? And who is the Zambian, right? Because anyone, if you were to get anyone from the streets, um, your average Zambian is a Zambian who has roots, has connections to different parts of the country, and not just is very, especially when it comes to younger generation. I think I speak to that. I think, yeah. I'm very cognizant of the fact that as a young person, speaking to a fellow young person as well, is the importance of us also having this very generational conversation as well. Because I think it's, whilst our parents, our grandparents can be having this conversation, it's really difficult to change old people's mindsets. But young people, there is no reason for a young person to continue to perpetuate stereotypes and these very harmful rhetorics about one another, especially when we so successfully were able to galvanize and use and bring young people together in Zambia. That's another great achievement that we're able to do politically as a Zambian population. That there was quite high numbers of young people going to the polls and voting in our last election cycle. This is something that has been very difficult across the world to be able to do, where there's a lot of voter apathy. And I think this is something that needs to be maintained. And what we should actually be talking about is, you know, speaking to now improving the quality of voter information and the information on which voters use to vote as well, right? And that it shouldn't be, it cannot be determined based off of just ethnic alliances. I think beyond here we're talking about civic responsibility. And so what happens then when you have people standing on a platform, politicians standing on a platform and making this very dangerous, what I would say even goes against the constitution, because the constitution very much stands against the constitution. The Zambian constitution very much stands against any kind of tribalism. And so, there's a form of illegality there to an extent, possibly. Of course, bearing in mind freedom of expression. However, freedom of expression cannot lead to violence or incitement, right? Or incitement of violence. What would you then say? What exists for Zambians? To I guess beyond laws and institutions, what kind of democratic culture should we, in a country like us, like the one that we have, that is very much pluralistic? What kind of democratic culture should we or should democratic response should we cultivate in such a situation? And I think we must also be careful as well, just to ensure that these conversations happen on both ends. And like you said, this has started from the time of our first president, right? Where right up to now 2022, 2021, where our leaders were largely either from the north and the east, and where you found that depending on who was in power, whether to the northern or an easterner, you tend to find people belonging to that tribe feeling as having a level of ownership of the office of government, right? And so
Yeah.
this is not something new, but it is becoming exacerbated where you have a minority president coming in as well, becoming a president now, where it's now super heightened. What
Mhm.
stops the buck? What kind of culture from all these different actors, whether it's civic organization, civil society, whether it's from our legal fraternity, from just your ordinary citizens, from people like democratic monitors, like, or journalists, what
Mhm.
role, what active practical role or things can they do to ensure that we protect our democratic pluralistic culture in Zambia?
I think it starts with us actually acknowledging that there's a problem.
Mm,
I think for years, a lot of people tried to act like there's no tribalism, because I remember maybe 10 years ago when I would start conversations about tribalism, there would be people who would make it seem like, I'm, you're exaggerating, none of this is true. But the moment you acknowledge that there's a problem, then you can do something about it.
mhm,
And I think the mere fact that conversations are starting, I saw that when I released my book,
mm,
I would even have friends who
mm,
would say, I've never noticed. And I would actually say to them, maybe it's because you're privileged to come from a
mhm,
tribe that is not, and that's
mhm,
again another discussion. I interview where someone suggested to me that Jito Kayumba had spoken about Bemba privilege and that being a thing. And I
mm,
certainly think that that is.
mhm,
And so I'm Bemba. It's something that I haven't had the privilege of experiencing, of course, because of my first name. But, the moment that we acknowledge that there's a problem and try to find our way to improving, then
mhm,
it's better. Because if we don't, then we'll find ourselves in cases like Rwanda, like you've spoken about, or like Zimbabwe.
mhm,
So it starts from there. And then following from that is just being able to see a person as a person. And
mm,
that takes every individual, whether you're a leader, whether you're working in a civil society, whether you're just a citizen of the country. It's important that we look at someone as just a person. The
mhm,
problem with stereotypes is that they have created a notion that people who belong to a certain type of grouping or tribe are all the same. So
mm,
there's dangerous stereotypes, members are thieves,
mm,
or selfish,
mm,
and so on and so forth.
mm,
Add to the list. But the moment that you realize that people are not monolithic beings, we
mhm,
are all individuals with personalities who are shaped by different experiences, then
mhm,
you take a person as a and you treat them as such rather than seeing someone and already creating a notion that no, this person belongs to this tribe, so they are like this.
mm,
So I think the moment that we acknowledge that and we change and shift our mindset,
mhm,
things will get better.
mm,
Because I also know people who have lost job opportunities because they belong to one tribe and not another.
true.
So the moment we shift and intentionally say, tell ourselves, a person is a person because of who they are and their experiences. We are not all monolithic beings. I think then there'll be improvement even in the way that we govern ourselves.
I'd like for us to sit in that. When you say we need to see one another as human beings, and you speak to something, a very real thing. What bias, what stereotypes do is that they dehumanize a person, right? You by default, by perpetuating harmful stereotypes about a person, what you end up doing is that you actually, according to you, we're not saying that this is true, but according to that person, to the perpetrator, is that you actually nullify the humanity in that person, right? And to an extent, actually also nullifies the humanity within yourself, because there's no real difference between you and the other person for you to be able to do that. And I guess, this, I'd like to connect it to the name of this platform. It's called StrangersX, because a big part of the motivation around calling it this is that, first, of course, this platform exists in the digital world, in the cyber world, and so there's this notion as though, because we share of ourselves and ideas and thoughts, even parts of our lives online, there's this sense of, as though, we know one another. There's a sense of familiarity that exists online. But then we can all recognize how, when we come offline, or sometimes when we come offline, we are very different people to who we are in terms of personality wise, in terms of who we present ourselves in public, in the space, and who we present ourselves offline in the quote unquote real world. Um, Similarly, in terms of how sometimes how a person will present, you come across someone that you know, and you come across their online persona, or how they present themselves, and you're shocked and surprised to be like, how is this the same person that I know? This is a very different person. And so, if anything, whilst it has certainly brought us closer together, as people online, beyond just just globally, but even in terms of as a nation, whether it's through TikToks or social media content creators creating content, to you get to have an insight of like, oh, this is what's happening, this is what's hip and happening, that's happening in Kopala, this is what's happening in the east, this is what's happening in the south, this is what's happening in Lusaka right now. You get to see these nuances in language, etc. So it no longer just becomes these very old archaic ideas of, oh, this is what southerners are, this is what easterners are, this is what northerners are. And now you actually get to realize that, oh wow, this is just another young person just trying to figure out who they are. But there's still a level of strangeness, a little of strangers. And so platforms like this, and books, writing, like, in the work that you do as well, a means of us moving beyond recognizing the strangers in each other, and then getting to know one another, to build a sort of a level of social cohesion in the world. Because there is no progress that can be done on your own. It cannot be done on your own. It has to happen within a community. And as Africans, that is something that we're very much is entrenched in our identity, in our blueprint, is that whether we're talking about it from a family level, of like, family is important, but community is also important. As we know, like, a child is raised by a village, right? And in that village, there's people. We don't live in villages anymore where everyone is just one thing. There's people with backgrounds, very colorful backgrounds from everywhere, even with, especially if you live in the city, whether you're finding yourself in Lusaka, in Dola, in Livingston. Like, there's people from different places there. And so, what then does that look like for a young Zambian who's going to the polls, who's listening, who's engaging politically, socially? Ending it off, in terms of, what are your closing remarks to this conversation that we've just had?
My closing remarks would be that we should really look back at our roots as
Mhm,
a country and look at policies that Kenneth Kaunda founded, particularly the policies around tribal mixing and One Zambia, One Nation.
mhm,
I think as a country, going to go far, if we're going to develop, we can't do it on our own, like you have
Yes.
said. Um, there's a South African proverb that says, "Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu," and that translates into a person is a person because of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very important that we as a nation should go back to how we were founded
Mm-hmm.
and really just embrace each. Look at a person as what does this person contribute to our country,
Mm-hmm.
and how can contribution then help us to develop. And I think it's very important for all of us. I would encourage Zambians all across, because I can imagine that even people in the diaspora will be listening to this, is think about what you're contributing to the country
Mm-hmm.
in whatever space, in wherever you are. I think the goal at the end of the day should be, how can we make our country great? You
Mm-hmm.
know, so a lot of people, I remember having a conversation with a young lady when I was still in university, and she asked me, "What's your favorite country?" And I said my favorite was Zambia, and she was
Mm-hmm.
shocked because everyone was talking about, "Oh, this girl has come back from South Africa." And she said, "I thought you'd say South Africa." I said, "No,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great country, but it's not where I'm rooted. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
can love all these other, America, the USA, England, Italy, but at the end of the day, my core goal should
It's
be,
home.
how can I develop so that I can make it as great as all those countries that everyone else thinks are great?" So my encouragement to a listener is, think about how you can serve your country, our country, in whatever space you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, even for me, just in the media space,
Mm-hmm.
it may not look grand, but if I'm going to say, I'm going to tell stories that speak positively of Zambia. My book alone, the first chapter is a praise song of my country,
Mm-hmm.
as bad as think it is or whatever, but that's my country, that's my love, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
encouragement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that couldn't have ended it off in a better way. As someone who's grown up in the diaspora, I must say, I think home is always home. And perhaps maybe sometimes you have to leave home for you to appreciate home. And there's something
Yeah.
really special that we have as Zambians. I think sometimes we tend to take for granted, and that was part of the reason why it was important for me that I thought that we I needed to sit down and have this conversation with a fellow Zambians, especially now the fellow young Zambians. And particularly here, I'd like to say that I think I'm intentionally more so speaking to young Zambians, that we have inherited a Zambia, a country that is really a beautiful country. We've done amazing things. And yes, we can talk about and we can identify all the many ways in which we can improve. And that is now our responsibility as the young generation, as the next generation, to continue that the work of doing that, of realizing the Zambia of our dreams, realizing one Zambia, one nation, continuing that. So thank you, Mono, for your honesty and for the care that you brought to this conversation. What has stayed with me is that unity isn't something that we should declare, but rather it should be something that we practice on a daily. And in a country as diverse as ours, that practice begins with language, how we speak, how we name one another, how we disagree, and how we resist turning difference into a weapon. One Zambia,
Indeed.
one nation. It's more than a slogan. It's a responsibility for leaders, communicators, and for all of us who are citizens of this great nation. This conversation is meant to open a series reflecting on Zambia's recent constitutional moment. In the episodes that will follow, I'll be looking at history, process, and institutions. But none of that matters if we lose sight of the people the nation is meant to hold. Thank you for listening and stay with us.